Uh, to start the meeting, we want to just identify some good resources for this. There's a lot of places to go for information. The stuff that I found the best, that helped me the most, was preeminently Russell Brown's Rolling Perfection, which is a 30-page ebook available on his website, PT Watercraft, about using two-part paints. There is nothing as good. And I have a sample of it here, and I'll show you some pictures from it on the a little bit later on. Second thing is Epoxy Works, which is the Goujon Brothers publication. They send it out, I don't know, every few months or quarterly or something. But all the issues are on the web, and they have excellent and reliable information about using epoxy, all in the context of particular projects. Lastly is Good Old Boat. Their stuff tends to be a little bit less technical, but it is also very good, and it's all available for free on the web. The materials, and all throughout here, I've got prices and specific products. I got the prices, and I buy my stuff mostly from Fisheries Supply. Club members get a discount there. Anybody know what our discount is? I think it varies by item, varies by product.
I think mostly it makes it competitive with most other internet type suppliers.
Right.
Yeah, so some things are not discounted, some things are. It's kind of weird.
Yeah, it is a little weird. Fiberglass Supply is an outlet for all kinds of composite stuff, but they do have also good painting stuff as well. You can go by their retail outlet in Burlington, which is fun, or just order over the internet. Total Boat was a newer supplier for me, and their prices are very good. They're available through Jamestown distributors. Also, you can order directly from the website there. I don't have personal experience, but I know there's a guy up in Port Townsend who is got a project called Duracell, Matt Steverson. They are sponsoring his project, but he is also a devotee of their products. So Total Boat, they have a wide variety now of products for boat building, and they're directed at the amateur boat builder. Their website also has quite a bit of good information on it. So I see one guy here, Wayne, is it? Wayne is using Total Boat? Okay, great. And then lastly, Eastwood Supply is sort of do-it-yourself automotive stuff. And Andrew, did you use Eastwood to get your Durablock stuff?
I just someplace online.
Yeah.
But the Durablock stuff is good.
Yeah.
Wayne has purchased stuff for his hot rods from Eastwood.
Right.
And he liked their fairing stuff, but it's car type hot rod, not boat hot rod.
Right. But for some of the stuff, you know, it's worth checking out the automotive supply places because some of the stuff is cheaper. I mean, there's a lot more cars in the world than there are boats. So it's worth looking at.
Yeah, the boards that they have come in lots of different shapes, and they're very light, stiff foam, and just makes them nice to use. So
yeah, I can't, I really love, Andrew lent me a whole box of fairing stuff, and I really like the Durablock fairing boards.
it's pretty stiff.
They're stiff. They're remarkably stiff and remarkably light. I was amazed. And light counts. Yeah. Yeah. All right. So first, before you do anything on painting, obviously surface prep is the key. And so, and working clean. And this is not my specialty. I work not clean, and it is a problem. So I'm going to ask Andrew to speak about getting that surface clean. Andrew's also a doctor, so he's always like, you know, trying to wipe down stuff and keep it antiseptic, and you know.
Yeah. Well, I'll admit that I didn't paint my boat, so you know, my cleanliness was really related to the epoxy.
Same project, though.
Same project, yeah. So I will say that I used the System 3, and there's no amine blush, but that's obviously something that needs to be looked out for. So you know, it's water soluble, it can be washed off. And then, you know, that last step is going to be, you know, your sanding with the fairing. So my technique was really to vacuum. And I know Vince says here, don't use the compressor to blow off your
Oh, Andrew,
surface.
did you use the compressor?
I was in a fairly small workspace, and I had a system that cleaned the air. So I just sort of felt like if I got the large particles off with the vacuuming and then blowed it with my compressor and stepped out and had lunch, the air would be clean when I got back. So I think that especially with at the epoxy stage, it's sort of hard to clean some of the small surfaces if you have, you know, little pits or little pinholes or this, that, and the other thing. They can be sort of compacted with the sanding process, and really the compressed air is what cleaned all those out. So
The reason that was given for not using the compressed air, and I didn't have a chance, but this was from one of the sources I consulted, and they were worried about moisture and oil. Now, if you use an oilless compressor, obviously that's not a problem. I don't know about the moisture thing. Compressors have, like, do they generate moisture in the?
yeah, I mean, that's why when there's a little valve that you'll open to let the air out, you know, compressed air, because it's going to start to fill up in the tank itself.
Water
Yeah,
in the tank.
and
I
so
see.
that's going to come out. But you can get little filters that you put in line.
Okay.
I think the oil and compressors or vacuums is a big issue if you're choosing something to vacuum bag, especially because
Right.
that can splatter oil, you know, through the whole area and drop there. So, and then obviously once you've gotten that stage, even simple things like touching it and some of your tools, or maybe from my air compressor, gets a little oil on the surface. So you can take, you know, water soluble things come off easy, but acetone is really going to be one of the easiest things to do.
Did you use any of these solvent wash things?
You know, the nice thing is that the ring disappears.
Yeah.
Turn the rag and still there to take off some of the next rags.
Yeah. I never did use, I used all acetone in my project. And then I read that, well, I should be considering these solvent wash things. They are more expensive, but probably last longer because you're not using as much. You know, you got to pour the acetone on like with a gallon can.
Mhm.
I got a question. Did you guys consider issues with silicon in the,
Speak up, please, and I'll repeat your question.
did you consider this issues with silicon in the sandpaper? The non-stick sandpaper and leaving
Oh, well,
residue?
it's actually a wax that they put in at Sterate. So yeah,
Oh, stearate, that's right.
yeah, I specifically used sandpaper that did not have that. And I'll tell you, the stage at which I noticed it in my project is that early on when I did my floats, I ended up I'd read a bunch of information off the airplane building community, and a recommendation was to put on a coat of just raw epoxy, you know, mixed epoxy, obviously, but no fillers to it. After we're done fairing, and the first time I did it, I ended up with lots of little fish eyes. So after some research, it really became evident that, you know, besides the shop cleanliness, that it was related to the sandpaper that I was using. And so I switched that, and it was never an issue again.
So stearate really is a problem. Yeah.
Yeah, it's designed, it's, you know, if you're using oil-based paints, like painting your house or what, all these types of things, it's a non-issue. And obviously some of it is dependent upon the viscosity of the surface. It might be contaminated, but not necessarily show up.
There was a question over here.
It's isopropyl alcohol as opposed to acetone, because the vapor pressure of alcohol is much lower. It's a lot less toxic, and it doesn't go through your bloods like acetone.
I have used the isopropyl alcohol, but nobody recommends it. And so I was a little nervous. I was a little goosey about, well, does it really remove the contaminants?
I think that isn't it more likely to remove water-based contaminants? Water and alcohol is, miscible in each other.
System 3 used to using this.
Well, I know that it's used in, if you use silicon to mount windows, it's often recommended to use 50-50 water and isopropanol, or on the plastic and straight isopropanol on the frames to get the silicon off, any residual silicon.
I don't think it really works. I wouldn't count on it working, but yeah, I've read that too.
I've done it. It seems to work for me.
Because my dad used that system for putting his windows.
Well, silicone is water cured, so I can see you have an effect there.
Good for a year, and then completely went pop.
Yeah.
Other areas of the boat where that wasn't done was a non-issue, and thanks good 10 years later. So
All right. So Andrew, anything else? What do you feel about tack cloths between? Did you do any of that? No use of tack cloth?
I think it's the same thing. It's a contaminant.
Yeah. Rolling Perfection says they say you can use tack cloths very lightly. Use a dark color to see if your dust is gone. I've never used tack cloths. Has anybody else here used a tack cloth for this? Scott?
Fisheries did stock them for a while, but a tack cloth that said it was epoxy safe. So it did not contain whatever the wax was that your typical tack cloths have. And they took the feel of them is much less sticky, but it didn't appear to bar the paint like some.
Yeah. So anyways, that seems to be a.
Sandpaper is far worse.
Right.
Use a tack cloth when you get our mouse spray. I knew nothing about issues with tack cloth, which is what was suggested. So
Yeah.
I did.
Not a problem.
It's not. I don't know. We're only 2 years in. The paint hasn't peeled yet. So
You're good. All right, let's go into fairing. And the first question is what fairing compound to use. And Jeff wasn't able to make it tonight. Andrew and I all use this System 3 Quick Fair. And I'm curious what other people have done or think, but Andrew, would you like to kind of explain why you used it, and what you think the advantages are?
I think that if you're doing a repair, it probably doesn't matter. You can use, what you have on hand in terms of making a substance that you think you can sand. But I felt for the large areas that I was working on, that consistency was going to be something that I couldn't maintain easily. And I'd been using System 3, obviously, with the rest of my epoxy, et cetera. So it was just sort of a natural thing to try.
My feeling is that, I tried to mix up my own fairing compound using epoxy and then West System Microlite, and I get inconsistent results, partly because I don't measure. I measure the epoxy and then I kind of add the system, the Microlite until it looks right. But obviously looking right isn't enough. It really needs to be the same. So you really need to be adding exactly the same number of micrograms or whatever the hell it is each time to get a consistent result. And if you don't have a consistent result, you have differential hardness, which is not going to sand well. So
yeah, I found the most difficult thing with Quick Fair is that it is quick. So there's very limited work time. And so that's an issue. They actually used to have a product called Slow Fair. And that resolved that problem. The reason they use the Quick Fair is because in a production type situation, it cures fast enough that you can be putting it off and sanding it and putting it back on again with a couple shifts. if you're working by yourself, you find you get along a little ways, and all of a sudden things are changing. So you can't mix up very much. So I would pre-measure, but not mix. And then, I'd keep moving it forward and et cetera. And as things changed, I'd stop and I'd mix and I'd keep moving forward. There's also.
You mix it in a shell pan or a gallon bucket, or how do you mix it?
Well, we're talking about fairly small quantities. So I would use, the plastic bins and or paper cups, the large paper cups. But what I ended up doing is once it's mixed, you have a drywall hawk. So, what they use for plastering, and you put it on there, and you can work it just a little extra after it's out of the mixing container, and leave it very thin on the hawk, and then it doesn't, it slows it down.
Yeah, I found that. So before we go on to techniques, what about the polyester parent compound? The boatyards just love that stuff because it cures up instantly. They're like the little bitty pieces of, you get a little ding. They do not want to put epoxy. They want to put their polyester on there and then sand it off and be, off and running 45 minutes later, whatever it is.
Yeah. I use that on the interior in spots.
I saw that in your email. I'm like, what? You're gonna be putting polyester on your boat?
I just found that it's so fast, it's so easy to sand, and it's so lightweight that the fairing that I'd done on the outside of the interior, but in areas where I felt like I couldn't deal with what it looked like without, that's what I did. But it was also used during the painting system and et cetera. Once you got some paint on, then that's all that was used. The polyester, like the Evercoat.
Oh yeah.
It's just so thin. I mean, not thin, but so smooth, and so easy that you get that coat on, and you feel like, okay, here's a little scratch, here's a little ding, here's a little whatever, and you can go on and get it taken care of, and go after it with the very fine, and it's done.
It's a feathers.
Oh, it's amazing stuff.
I haven't tried doing this, but System 3 makes a resin called SB. I can't remember the number after it, which is specifically designed.
SB 112.
Pardon?
Was that SB 112?
I think so. I don't remember the number, but it's basically designed to cure with no blush, so you can actually put polyester over it. So if you wanted to try that on an epoxy layup, you could coat it with this resin and then see if the polyester would stick to it. They designed it for surfboards where people wanted to do an epoxy layup but coated in gel coat.
So Andrew, do you worry about you're going to come back later and make some modifications? Now you've got some polyester in there. Well, the epoxy will always stick to polyester, I guess, so you don't worry about it. I mean, so that's interesting. I mean, I didn't give that perhaps nearly as much prominence as I should have. I went back when I had those dings. I went back there with a quick tear, which means waiting and all the rest of it. But I think what Andrew's referring to is especially after you prime, it's amazing to me what appears. You think you've done a great job or something, and then you put the white paint on there, and everywhere you look, there's these little imperfections. And so that's where I could see being able to, do that in the morning, come back by lunch. And
yeah, I learned from the airplane community, in doing that with epoxy. And so, I'm sorry. Not going to such a fine grit on the final sand, and mixing sort of a honey consistency of resin and with this microballoons, and then scraping it, putting it on and scraping it off as hard as you could with a plastic spatula. That basically filled those areas. You might have all these little ridges or whatever, but it would just take seconds to get those down. And then putting on that, just a coat of resin. And this is after, all faired. So it's not, we all think, oh, it's hard to, sand raw resin, but it's actually not as long as it's faired. And so then I would sand it down and that surface would just all go, it was perfectly clear and shiny, obviously, but it would go just to a matte surface and you could see your problems, but you hadn't put any paint on. And there's no pinholes, there's no texture from this or that, etc.
In a sense, we've left over a part of the fairing discussion going directly to a primer, because this is after you finish fairing. So let's go back to fairing, for instance. It's a nasty subject, but we do need to cover. Let's talk about the actual getting it on quick. I had a lot of trouble getting a consistent coat. I was extremely parsimonious with the fairing compound. The guys at the boatyard laughed at me because I was putting on, little patches here. I got a low spot here. I put some fairing compound on it. They're like, no, you need to cover the deck with fairing compound and then sand it all down. I just couldn't deal with it.
I think part of that for Vince was that he's got this big flat deck, and how do you put it on and climb up on the deck to take care of it in an ergonomic fashion, and etc. But I'll say that my goal, I had lots of places to practice, shall we say, and my goal in the end was to sort of map things out at the beginning, and I used just a metal yardstick, and I could put a little graphite across the bottom, and you just sort of chatter it like that, go down very quick, but it only leaves a mark where it's high. So at that point where your major lows are. And so in the end, I agree with the boat people in that you have to have the last time you do it has to be completely covered and completely sanded. That's the only way that it's going to be perfect.
Okay, so I'm going to show you. How can I share my screen down here? I got to show you. You're going to laugh. I don't want to do this. Okay. Want to see how I make that go away? Yeah, but
He wants to get rid of the little portions from Zoom that are covering his.
Yeah. Only
Oh, there it
covering
is.
screen
There it
not
is.
broadcast.
so that Andrew is, I think you probably remember this, but
Yeah.
that's what my deck kind of looked like. All those that sort of leprosy looking thing. And yeah, it was, I don't know how many steps of going through I did because I was unwilling to simply cover the whole, I just went back and forth. It was,
Well, every time I did it, my goal was to try and do it with 2 fills, and it never happened.
my goal was to get through at 6.
But I'll just say that I think that by mapping it out, then you have an idea what you're up against.
Yeah.
And you can sort of decide, also what you want the end result to look like. Did you want it to look, you can make it look like it popped out of a mold, or you can not. But so I mapped it out and filled those and sanded them. And it would take a couple times of sort of mapping again with those fills just to get them low enough. Right. In the end, you can fill those, but you can't sand highs if it's glass. If it's
So talk to us about your technique for actually applying the fairing compound.
Well, when I first started on the holes, everybody in the sort of farrier community that you would find blogs on, what we did was to put little beads of fairing compound, thwart ships along the pole, and then you sand that down with your longboard. So you made, so let's say they're 6 inches apart. And that all gets sanded down with your longboard.
So these beads are like an inch wide.
Well, I used a Ziploc bag, and my goal was to make them diamond shaped so that they were wide at the base and narrow at the top.
Oh, so just really narrow. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, and then you, when you do that, you're essentially getting a map where you look at it and you sort of say, wow, it's all disappearing in this area. Looks absolutely perfect. And there's areas where they're sort of deep, which is unfortunate because it means if you're going to make it perfect, then it's going to need sand again.
I
Okay.
see. That's why you were talking about in the written materials, you talk about something about establishing edges.
Sort of, yeah. I mean, edges for me are like if you have some combings, or you've got some
Oh,
tape
that's a good
lines
one.
and stuff. If you just start dragging your fairing board, a wide putty applying, it's going to chatter and all that and etc. So that in the end you're going to be disappointed how that does. Now it's got a big chatter area as wide as your board is. But if you just take care of that area and smooth it out, now you have something for it to glide on. It's
for the
perfect,
next-
right?
Yeah, for the
And
next.
then depending upon how long your device is, you're not transmitting a problem from the edge further out.
So you got your hawk, you're holding your drywall hawk. You put the material on with a 6-inch knife.
Yeah, okay, so in the end, that's how I did it in the past, and then you'd fill between those
Yeah.
and sand it. That had its issues. It was, what I came up and found at the time, which was something that was, I had to order it from Europe at the time, but it's a FlexiCat, and it's a long board that articulates with, handles, and it produces just a perfect curve. No matter, you push harder, and if it's round, it'll take that shape to a degree. So I worked at applying the fairing compound with my hawk and let's say a 6-inch putty knife, and then I would use that FlexiCat and pull it across, and that would remove a lot of material, and it would glide on high spots and fill the lows. Wasn't perfect because there's always some drag, it seems, so that lows end up, you're filling a low and it never fills up as high as it looks like it should because of that drag. But you can control that by the angle that you hold it. So if you want to leave some behind, just make it a little bit flatter and it leaves it a little bit thicker. If you want to take a lot off, you just leave it at more of a to it and take it off. And I would move forward then. So that's why, I take care of that area. I had the advantage that I could put it in my boat in a very ergonomic position because I had floats that weren't attached to anything, and I could spin my main hull in the place that I was working. So I'd spin it and I'd work on the deck, and I'd spin it and work on the bottom, and then I'd turn it so I could work on the sides and stuff.
Just
On a gimbal? No, it's only 22 feet long, and when it was just put together, I mean, I could lift the boat up, manhandling, but I would put it in, I had chain hoists at 4 corners and a, wide lift belt that went across. So I'd lift the boat up and I'd spin it then I'd let it back down. So in any case, ergonomics, obviously for that wide board makes an enormous difference. If you're trying to do that, down in front of you, it would be difficult.
Yeah.
But in any case, so then, and you can take that stuff off the FlexiCat, put it back onto your hawk, and you just work it to make sure there's no big air bubbles or whatever, and you put it on. And then, at some point you'd sort of stop and I'd throw a little bit out and mix some more, and I could keep moving.
Yeah, and it's not easy. It may have taken you a while to kind of learn the process.
Yeah, it was, but there was lots of surface area, so
Right.
I had plenty of opportunity to.
Yeah, I think this is one of the things about fairing is that if you do screw it up, you can fix it eventually with enough sandpaper.
Mhm.
You just put on another coat, you sand it off again. The difference with the painting, you kind of get one chance. To sand off all that paint, it's too painful.
Mhm.
So there's a different kind of skill there, especially if you're spraying. And that's one of the reasons I think that for an amateur, spray is kind of too dangerous. And there are other reasons as well.
I think the follow-up to that in the end is that anything that you do, unless you put, you know, I mean, I did this in areas where you put on enough fairing material that it all sort of disappears, and then you spend whatever it takes to get it off to the right spot. But if you're trying to minimize the amount of material that you're putting on, so you don't have to sand as much off and you don't have to spend on the material, then what you have to watch out is for the high spots. Because, you know, the inclination is that if I sand just a little bit more,
I get that low.
I'll get the low. But what ends up actually happening is that the hard spots make it so that your board, it doesn't look like you're damaging, but if you're actually riding on them, it holds that side of the fairing board up and you start making new lows. And the next time you try it, it's like you're sort of, if you find yourself going like, wow, I didn't have this problem before. Where did that problem come from? You know, there's a few issues that cause it, but one of them is the highs that you don't want to damage. But
And you look at this picture, see those black spots?
Mhm. That's carbon.
That's me sanding the highs.
I think that the quick fair does become transparent. So, you know, at some point if you're mapping it out and you're mapping the high spots thinking you're going to fill the lows, in the end, you want to make sure that you map the high spots and make marks, you know, like with your pencil or something like that, because as the quick fair becomes transparent and you're sanding, it becomes very visible, but you actually haven't sanded on it yet, so you're still safe. So if you find areas like you know, you're on the second sand, it's like, yeah, I'm running into that same spot I did the first time. You don't want to do it more than 3 times, then, you know, you can take that effort to.
So one thing I found helpful in what Andrew provided was thinking about the sequence. Start with that big ass board. Grab his giant board, will you? We want to start with the biggest, stiffest board here. Who hold it up for the camera here? Well, I guess I'm. Yeah.
No, this is a flexible board. Yes, because
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
there's a different one.
I would suggest that you don't use a flexible board until you think you're finished.
Right. So that's in the materials. Is start with your stiff, long board.
Yeah.
Uh,
Longest stiff board that you can come up. They have one like this that's stiff. I found even the Durablock isn't quite as long, but the reality is that, you know, once you're getting close, that's not really a problem to use something slightly shorter, and actually it might save you. It might hide some problems for you so you don't see them and you sort of keep moving.
That's a mental health tip right there.
Yeah.
So I have to say that this putting 80 grit or 36 grit, you know, in the materials, you'll see a discussion of what they call cheese grating, which is to put a really coarse grit and basically shave off partially cured fairing material. Well, trying to drag that 36 grit with a monster board across, and you have to be strong. I mean, I thought I was gonna die, you know, when I first tried that. It's a very physical activity. So the Durablock, if you use a 2 3/4 inch, you know, sandpaper and a smaller, lighter board, you may be able to handle it better.
Yeah, I think that I really found the first time that I did it that I was chasing problems that I felt like I hadn't had, and they were showing up, and you try to fix that, and then you've got a different problem. Because I mean, I mapped it out, so I knew where problems were, right? And then all of a sudden, like, what? And that was caused by using a flexible board.
Yeah.
And I have the rigid one here I used, but I never used this flexible one after I first used it, because the FlexiCat has a sanding board and the fairing board, and they articulate exactly the same way. So that just means that if the fairing material went on with it, it's going to be really close to that flexible one, obviously, and then it's just making sense. But I still use a straight board, even using that until the last part when I then used the FlexiCap that flexed and sanded.
So now let's say between coats of fairing, you get one of the things you mentioned was don't be chasing a low with a flexi board, just scuff it. Because you do need to scuff the quick fare between coats, right? I mean, you're not, because there is a certain glossiness to it.
Yeah, well, that's if my sense is that if you're forced to stop because of a high, you're gonna have lows that are unsanded.
Right.
So you need to sand those, but you either got to use a really small sand block, or you can use the the 3M pad
Now, see,
and just scuff it that way, because it takes on a glossy form and nothing will stick to it, just like unsanded epoxy. So you have to do something to it, but making it a little bit lower is no big deal, but you don't want to transfer that out to areas that you feel like, okay, this is good, I'm just trying to take care of that.
so I think that the point about those 3M sanding pads, which are in the materials, they're great.
Oh, they are amazing.
They are great because they take the scuff off, but they just don't remove, they take the gloss off, but they just don't remove
They
much
don't, yeah.
material.
They don't.
I mean, that's a key thing, I think. And also between paint coats, if you go too far on a paint coat, if you let too much time expire and you can't recoat within that adhesion window, using the scuff pad is a great way. Don't get out the 320, just use the scuff pad.
You can put the scuff pad on a Velcro
Right.
sanding device.
Right.
If you want to.
You want to see what's in chat?
Flick through a couple of pictures to see where we got to. This was replacing the hatch with a blister, cut off the hatch, put this blister thingy on there, laminated in place. There's a kind of repair of the hole. Also put in a new hatch and a surround for the hatch. But the deck was full of dips and bumps, and because I was laminating all this different stuff and all these layers, and I tried to clean off the layers to make it as fair as I could before I started fairing, but it was not fair. But the great thing about a deck is it's going to be non-skid, and that conceals a lot of skins. It's I think 1/2 inch foam and glass on each side. And the 1/2 inch foam is actually not adequate for that deck, so I had to put in some ridges, some ribs underneath to support the new stuff.
Yeah, even on my 22 Farrier says 3/4 inch.
Yeah, the 1/2 inch on the F-31
Yeah.
not
They learned, yeah.
not good enough.
No, it's not.
No, this is after I was doing all the work, because I was laminating, was patching stuff in, So because of all the shit I replaced, at the intersections, there were all these bumps. So there you go with the fairing. And then, after a while, I got to be putting on non-skid, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But it was a mess. It was hard. This is putting on, painting on the non-skid afterwards. And you can even see some nice little holidays there. Great. This is something we're going to talk about that we didn't talk about, which is shaving the fairing. Why don't you talk about that?
It seems ridiculous to be able to feel like you're going to make good decisions with a 3-inch metal blade, but you can actually make the surface very flat with that. You do the same thing you do with fairing board. Hold it at different angles and etc. I mean, principally, you're going to take down. You're going to make little ridges because the problem is this: once you put the fairing on and done your final pass, you at first you feel like, oh, I need to go fix that spot, but that's always a mistake. So
Yeah.
You leave problems behind, but then the scraper can take out all the ridges and etc. without any sanding. It just happens very quick. But you can actually make, if I found a series of high spots and etc., I mean, I could take it down pretty quick. That particular shaver is a wonderful device from Sweden, I think.
Yeah,
You
this,
use a straight edge to check, if you're, you didn't have any hollows or highs.
Yeah, I did. That's how I mapped it out at the beginning, was, just a yardstick metal. So you can either just hold it and look at it, or I would just put a little bit of graphite on the edge, and then you could just sort of tap it like that, and it would leave a mark on the high spots, but there'd be no marks in below.
Hmm.
Same, as you move it along.
It seemed like
The other thing that those scrapers work real well is that, anytime you've got a combing and a this and a that and et cetera, you can put in a little extra material and it just comes out so quick. They've got round ones and triangular ones and the flat ones.
yeah, and these, this particular scraper, the Baco, has a carbide bit, replaceable carbide bit. It lasts a lot longer than the steel scrapers, so it's definitely worth the extra.
Well, probably. Fishery supply sells them.
Yeah.
But you can get cheaper blades and stuff online.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
the round one, when I made my little round fillets and et cetera,
Did you scrape them with that?
well, yeah, you
Wow.
make it similar sizes and et cetera, so that you
Wow.
can fit in and you can take care of it.
Hmm. So are those blades too hard to put an edge on?
I haven't sharpened the carbide blade.
No, I just throw them out. They've got two sides, so you use one side and when you get a little frustrated, you roll it over and you're happy, and then you have to throw it out. They're sort of expensive, but it was a non-issue for me.
And it's on the 10 packs.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the
I mean, that's what I said.
the carbide is really hard. I mean, it lasts a while.
Yeah, I've never had a scraper like.
And it would be a real bitch to sharpen it because trying to hold, yeah, it would be tough.
Pull an edge on a carbide, yeah.
Yeah. Let's see if there's anything else I want to show here. Baco, B-A-H-C-O. This was primer. This is first coat of primer, and you can see that all the carbon stuff still shows through. But this is where I could have used that polyester filler, because after I put the first coat of primer on, I realized, oh my God, I got this and this and this to deal with.
You take polyester, you mean Bondo or you mix out of?
Well, isn't Bondo a kind of a polyester
Probably.
color?
I mean, the ones that I used, the one polyester thing that I used it's called Evercoat. Comes in a blue can, it's 2-part, you mix it, it fires off very quickly, but it's just so
Bondo's tough. That's the
smooth.
Yeah.
Bondo is hydrophilic. It draws water
It's tough. So, yeah.
itself.
No, you have to overcoat it with a thin coat of epoxy after you finish fairing it.
This gentleman just said that if you use Bondo, you got to overcoat it with epoxy.
Yeah, I don't know, I didn't use any.
Didn't use any
Like that.
Bondo.
Well,
Yeah.
the classic Bondo is,
In my painting process, it wasn't anything to do with epoxy.
I just want to hear what this gentleman said. Who is? Could you say again what you?
Oh, what I was saying is that if you do use a polyester-based filler, which will tend to attract moisture, if you put a thin coat of epoxy over top to seal it after you finish fairing it,
I see. Yeah,
you won't have that issue.
got it. Okay.
I did a weird thing that seemed to produce a useful material, which is to take Formula 27, which is kind of runny and loose, and mix it with just a tiny bit of West System high strength epoxy of the high strength adhesive powder.
Yeah.
Just to thicken it, just to get it to where it holds its position. And that has made a wonderful filler for polyester. I've used it on the boat and the car.
I
And
see.
it
So
seems to
this
be-
gentleman says he's used a polyester resin and added the West, high strength adhesive filler.
Yeah,
And
and
used
the formula marine, it's the marine polyester Formula 27, but that stuff is very loose and
I
very
see.
runny. And if you want it to stay in position, just a little bit of that West System adhesive powder, and it makes a really great sort of filler for that sort of stuff.
Great, thank you. So let's move on from fairing. And talk a little bit about priming and oh no, let's talk about sanding for a second, because sanding is a big subject. What's that? No, you can. All right, so let's talk sanding. And obviously you can do some power sanding. You know, I used a belt sander not to fair, but to get ready to fair, when I was like trying to get edges knocked down. You know, in preparation for fairing, I used a random orbit. But I used the random orbit actually quite a bit. At the end of the day, I realized I'd used it for.
I used it more towards the end than I did at the beginning because I was convinced that I would cause trouble. But I think that, you know, when you're first starting, there's issues to take care of, and you're probably not going to really cause yourself trouble, but it speeds things along.
Yeah.
And you know, towards the end, you can use a soft pad, and that's what they're going to do when they're painting the surface, right?
Right.
So, but I found, you know, I had a 6-inch hard pad, let's say 80 grit or whatever, and when you knew that there was a bunch of stuff that needed to come off and etc., I would take it off. The other thing I found is that the quick fair, it's funny how it's a little bit hard to sand right at the beginning. And maybe because of that glossy surface where some resin is risen as it cures, I'm not sure, but you know, I take a little bit off sometimes in places.
With random orbit.
You know, if you run your fairing board across and do, you know, you're doing your X pattern and you do the whole surface, you're going to immediately see where the highs and lows are.
Right.
So you couldn't stop at that point and say, oh, I mean, because we're almost got a flat surface, right, for the areas we're talking about. And you can get your random orbital out and just do the parts where you just finished sanding that showed that they were high.
Knock them down.
Knock them down,
Sand
then
again.
you sand across. This time maybe you do, you know, 2 passes with it, and you look at it, and you can tell the difference between the pattern of, you know, your cross hatches with your fairing board and the random orbital, and you can see, oh, this is an area it looks like I can take down a little bit more and get it out.
So now let's talk about sandpaper, which is a deep subject. I
Mhm.
do not have a PhD in sandpaper, but it's a. Will you make the case for us for this mesh sandpaper?
Yeah, I use the mesh. There's no sterate. It just does not clog, and it lasts a long time. It's a little bit like that scraper. It's, you know, if you're used to cheap sandpaper and you use that, you're sort of going, wow, this is a miracle.
So now I'm going to say something which I felt like if the quick fair isn't all the way cured, obviously it's going to clog more unless you're
Oh,
using the cheese grater.
Yes.
So cheese grater is 36 grit, 40 grit,
36.
36 grit, which is basically little rocks, and that doesn't clog because it's just so. But I was working a lot in the relatively cool weather, and I had a little problem with even the mesh clogging up because the quick fair just wasn't hard enough, quite good enough.
So I must have gotten, I'm trying to remember where I got it, but I had some that fit, you know, green 36 that fit on the board, you know, that 3M makes. And I'll say the other thing about the mesh is that it's very uniform. So you can use a higher grit and cause less scratching than with others I felt. But that 36, you know, had big chunks of this, that, and it was sort of a nuisance. But, you know, once that sort of cleaned itself up just a little bit.
Yeah.
For the cheese grating, which is where you have the quick fair, which is my only experience using this, when it's non-tacky, but you can still put your thumbnail into it, you know, with a little bit of work, there's going to be a brief period of time where you can sand it and it comes off in little shreds or little granules very quickly with 36 grit, and it doesn't clog the paper. So you can do, you know, 3 hours of work in 15 minutes. But
So then we got the mesh. Now, if
it's
If
all
the
right,
timing right.
it's a short window. In fact, I found that, you know, some areas that by doing that, you're producing heat. and the heat makes it cured. And so you're sort of going along and you try and go back and it's like, oh, this cured. Well, I was down at the other end. But it still was valuable to do in certain areas.
So one of the things about you got to decide, are we talking about power sanding? And power sanding with mesh is revolution because you got you got the vacuum extraction, man, it's amazing. And the boatyard, that's all, I mean, they're all about the random orbit and the mesh and the extraction. That's it. The boards though, I tried the boards with the vacuum extraction. You can get boards that you use with mesh and, sanding blocks and boards and pads, and you use with a mesh and you attach your vacuum. I found it kind of annoying to have to drag the vacuum hose around it. So I ended up going back to the Durablock, which I liked a lot because it was just so light, and so that ended up being my favorite thing was the Durablock actually for the handset. Even though I recognize, that the mesh sanding is the shit for power sanding. It was interesting.
So, but what you did use the mesh paper on the Durablock?
I tried the mesh paper on the Durablock, but then because there's no extraction, it did tend to, it fogged up some, yeah. But it was interesting. Did you have any trouble when you're, using those vacuum extraction boards? Did that bother you at all?
I ended up buying lots of different little boards because you always felt like there's got to be something a little bit better. But, yeah, I got a couple of those. One, they weren't quite as big. And, I bought one where you could dial in a specific curvature, which, sounds so great, but it was not practical for what I was doing.
Yeah.
And with vacuum extraction, so in the end, I used vacuum when I had my random orbital, but other than that, I just didn't worry about it.
Huh.
You wear your dust protection.
Yeah.
You sort of have to stop, depending upon the surface, you have to stop and vacuum multiple times while you're
Right.
sanding, obviously.
Right.
Things just got dirty and you cleaned up.
Yeah. One thing about vacuuming, for this kind of dust vacuum, get a vacuum attachment that has the brush on it. When I started, I was just using the kind of floor scraper thing. The brush is the way to go.
I went through quite a few parts.
Your sanders with the electric or air power?
I use electric.
Mine's electric.
Yeah, I mean, those air powered sanders are great, but boy, they take a lot of air. You have to have a big compressor to run a random orbit.
The thing with the air though, is you can't hold the horsepower that air sander has. I mean,
Yeah,
I've run them against like a 5 horsepower air compressor, and you can get ahead of a 5 horse, but the amount of work an air compressor will do compared to an electric is probably 3-5 times.
yeah, I know. I mean, I was watching the guys at the boatyard use those air sanders, and I was like, oh God, I wish I had that. But
The air sanders are very light. I mean, air sanders are very light, I think, in comparison. So I think that's the biggest selling point, probably.
Well, and there's more power in them. It wouldn't let you plug into their air system.
well, I would have had to go out and buy a whole new set of sanders, So they're not going to lend me their tools, So yeah.
DA air sander.
I never felt underpowered, but I did feel like I got tired of moving it around.
Yeah, I was so amazed to see their big random orbit and how light they are. They're great.
Yeah. I mean, you spend almost more time swapping paper than you do sanding. I mean, they go so fast.
Yeah, that'd be good. All right, enough about sandpaper.
What was the byproduct?
Yeah.
Favorite brand of sandpaper?
Oh, anybody got favorite? I mean, I just use the 3M. I use their blue grade, which is kind of a medium grade. I don't know. What do you think about brands of sandpaper and grade?
I think it's the Merca is what I used in the mesh.
For mesh, the Merca stuff is brilliant.
But I also used the rolls. There was sort of a ready maroon. They sell it at Fisher's. I can't remember what
Yeah.
it is. And you can get it in rolls so you can put it on, cut it off. just cheaper that way, or they sell it in boxes all for different size sanders.
Yeah, I use the 2 3/4 inch rolls. I got green rolls, I got blue rolls, and I got some red rolls too.
There's a place called Wyoming Adhesives, and they sell a lot of like, they buy like surplus sandpaper, and they got prices. They're like a third to 40 to 50% off what you see in the store.
Did anybody hear that? Wyoming Adhesives, Abrasives? Yeah, Wyoming Abrasives. I'll take a look at that because I don't know how much I spent on sandpaper. It was a lot. It was a lot. Okay, we talked about sanding. Now let's talk about priming, which is a relatively short discussion. You didn't prime.
Well,
You
I
did-
farmed out the painting. I did a little experimentation with again, system 3, they have a waterborne epoxy 2-part epoxy paint. And I used it with roll and tip on my dad's boat, and you don't mix silicone in with it. It worked great. And I thought, well, I'm gonna take it to the next level and try spraying, because I've done a lot of spraying with my house and stuff. But you know, the space that I had that wasn't real conducive for cleanliness at the time, and just felt like I was fussing. And I looked at it and I said, I'm just not gonna be happy with the exterior of my boat. So I had somebody else do it for me. But and you know, they have a fixed idea. I think that I had things prepared so that they could have avoided the soft, you know, sanding primer that they do and gone straight to hard primer. But since I was paying him to do the job, he was going to do what he knew so that he got the product that he was, you know, expecting to offer me. And so it did get primed. Yeah. But it was all done spray, and it was all, you know, all grip, all craft.
Right. So the thing about priming is there is I use the Interlux primer for amateurs, you know, for hand stuff. It's a 2-part primer, and it's a combo primer. It's both hard enough and it's soft enough to sand and hard enough to be the final primer. So it eliminates a step, which is kind of nice. This idea of you use a sanding primer and then you use another kind of primer. It's like, oh God, you know, it's just too much. The primer that I used from Interlux worked great, you know, and it was relatively sandable. So I would recommend that.
How much problem do you think it covered? I mean, did your surface have to be
No,
98%?
I don't know percentage, but it did cover some small stuff. It definitely did cover some small stuff. Probably not as much as a thick coat of sprayed on soft primer.
I sort of felt like, you know, if I'd known that's what was going to happen, that I might not have had to take it to quite the, you know, same level of perfection, and and it would have been covered with that soft primer coat. But I don't know. I mean, once you got to the hard coats, anything that's there shows through with the spray. So I mean, it was just.
So the thing about your primer though is you got to choose your final coat product, because you got to use all the same product from the same manufacturers. You can't be mixing and matching. So your choice of primer dictates you got to choose your final paint time you choose your primer. I ended up putting on 3 coats of primer at places because I found so many holes, divots, and went back times. So I had a lot of primer on. So you prime, you get it to, your first coat of primer. If you're going to put, usually you end up with 2 coats of primer. Your first coat, you might end up standing to 120 or something. Your last coat of primer, you're supposed to go, before you put on your 2-part, you got to go to 220 or 320. You really are taking it down to a fairly smooth surface at that. And this is where you start to go crazy because you see it.
When you sand that primer, are you hand sanding or?
Yeah, block. Or I used actually a soft pad and a random orbit for some stuff.
The soft primer on my boat, they block sanded, but as soon as the hard primer was on after that, all the sand was done. random.
Yeah.
Random orbital, but that first one was block, not long blocks, obviously, but.
So then you're going to your final coats, and you're going to do, and here's where I want to make a pitch for rolling perfection. So there's Russell Brown, a lot of you know who he is. He's a boat builder up in Port Townsend, and he's published an ebook called Rolling Perfection. And perfection is a reference to a particular Interlux paint that's adapted to hand application and non-professional use. It's all produced by Asco Nobel, which is the same company that does All Grip, which is professional, and All Craft, which is a professional paint, but which is repairable. The Interlux Perfection is not as repairable. You can't buff it out and kind of bear in a new patch. But the Interlux Perfection really is a great thing. And what makes it especially great is the availability of this 32-page ebook, which goes into tremendous detail. And I've got a sample, I've got a copy of the book here floating around somewhere. And also the guy who reps Perfection here in the Northwest, you can call him up, and the materials have his email and his phone number. And if you have a problem or a question, you just call up the guy. You don't have to, try to find somebody at Fisheries who knows it. And Dave Atwater has a soft spot for us because he was a member of the club, has a trimaran, and lives up in Bellingham. So it's a great resource, a great resource. So that's why I chose the paint I did, because I knew the guy, and because I had this great advice book. So I've given in your materials kind of a sampling of the rolling perfection painting technique. And a lot of you will have heard of rolling and tipping, which is where you roll it on and then you pop the bubbles with a brush. And what he's developed is a technique for putting on the paint in a very thin coat, 2 coats, 3 coats, depending. But the perfection is sufficiently self-leveling that if you put it on thin enough with a thin foam roller, you can get a really nice sprayed looking finish because it'll self-level. The book goes into a lot of detail about how to get the evenness of the coat that you want. It's a physical skill. You got to be very attentive to how much paint is on your roller, how hard you're putting on it. But the book goes into a lot of detail about how you can tell whether you got the right paint. So it's a remarkably a great way to paint because you don't have the spray stuff. You don't have to have another person following behind you to tip. It's a good technique. Russell has a lot of good, product advice. One thing that I figured out was this fine line tape, 3M fine line tape, which is a plastic tape for getting your lines where your non-skid is or to separate areas. Paint doesn't bleed under it, comes right off. That stuff is great. I tried some blue or green, 3M painter type tape. No, do not do that. That was a mistake.
To make smooth curves.
Yeah, it's stretchy, so you can stretch it around. Yeah, the tape is, you can kind of pull one edge, draw it around an oval or something. It works really, really well.
It does come in different widths, so there's gentle curves, and if you're looking at a big curve, etc. A tighter curve, you can get the smaller stuff. But yeah.
What was the name of that tape?
It's in the materials. It's fine line tape. 3M makes it.
I found that you do have to seal that edge. So you put it on and you sort of rub something over it, and that's not always adequate. So, running your fingernail along that inner edge is.
Well, you got to adhere it
Yeah.
carefully. Yeah, burnish it. burnish it, that's the word. Yeah. I'm not really gonna say much more about the exterior painting techniques, because the 3M Rolling Perfection book has so much good detail. And I've looked at other, YouTube stuff, and nobody has that kind of detail, so buy it.
Said 300.
Oh, Russell Brown, yeah, I'm getting tired here. I'd like to say a few words about some interior painting, which is kind of beyond the scope, but Andrew did some great interior painting on his boat using kiwi grip. Tell him about that.
I had wanted to do sort of everything on the build, and so I was pleased with the paint job, but the fact that I hadn't done it was sort of. And but I must admit, I helped him on the first coat of sanding primer that went on, and you just had this feeling like this stuff is so toxic. And at that time, I was in a garage at my brother's house, and even though it was a detached garage, I mean, it went into their house. So in any case, I was looking for something that was like zero toxic, no cleanup, low prep, I mean, et cetera, et cetera. And when I had planned on doing my own painting, I was thinking I was going to use kiwi grip as, my non-skid on the exterior. But what I ended up using was the little high density 4-inch rollers, have the round into them. And
Also known as weenie rollers.
weenie rollers. I mean, what a great thing. You can just push that thing and dab it into all sorts of areas, et cetera, and then, finesse it out, et cetera. But I used kiwi grip, and I had it tinted so that it matched, the white on the exterior, oyster or whatever, a little bit of a warmer color than it comes. And I really like it for certain things. The ceiling and, the sidewalls and stuff, they just sort of disappear because it's matte and it's just got this fine texture to it. So I've appreciated that.
You used it on the inside
Yeah, just
So when you say.
Just
for a
like-
matte finish.
as a finish.
Okay.
It's meant for non-skid, yeah. And though that when you buy it, you'll get this roller that is just sort of this tangled mess, because the goal is you roll that on and you keep rolling it as it thickens a little bit until you get the peak that you want.
Yeah, it
But
creates,
that's not what I'm doing, obviously. Yeah,
it creates these
little
little
wave mountain waves.
So
mountain.
you used it without the roller that creates the peaks, and it then becomes a relatively smooth surface, but is it really viscous? Why did you use that? Why did you?
Because I wanted some texture to it,
Okay, so it reminds me of the-
and it's water. It's waterborne and water clean.
But it's pretty hard, isn't it?
It's not as hard as you think. And I think that when you talk about people that have that on their deck, it wears down in areas that you walk fairly quickly. And it also has some porosity to it, so it can be difficult to clean. Or, I mean, you have to clean it. You sort of think, I'm just gonna rinse it off or something, but it just picks up dirt and oils and stuff like that. But for the ceiling and the sidewalls, I haven't had any trouble. I did do it on the floor, but I have a composting toilet that sits underneath, the cockpit, and it needs to be pulled out. And, one season, and because I didn't put it on very thick.
Yeah,
But
you
it's
scratched
needed to
up.
scratch and stuff. So,
I have to say though, I've been inside Andy's boat, and it's like being inside a cloud. It is just beautiful, because I've never seen such a surface that is both kind of matte and not like fragile looking, I mean, they're matte paints that you put on your house, like a matte latex paint, that you see, whatever. You can see your thumbnail, and this is harder than that.
Yeah.
It's just I think it's a great way to go.
yeah, the roller is a big part of it. Because the texture you want is going to be determined by the roller. It's a high density roller. You can get them, they're about $1 a piece. And you can use it for hours.
So it's smooth enough that cleaning the surface is pretty
Yeah, well, the
easy.
surfaces that works real well don't usually require cleaning, you know what I mean?
I've got kids.
Yeah, okay. But I'll tell you what I did in the galley is that I just got some, a rattle can of clear coat for outboards. That was compatible, you know, with paint, and I just sprayed that on.
Manufacturer and model number in the material.
Yes, only because I was looking at it.
And
What
price.
did I use? What did I use? I sprayed that on because I used the same material on the counter and, you know, the stove, buying the stove material. So I just sprayed that on, and that, it didn't really change the appearance that much. But it's just, you know, you wipe it clean. And I mean, you got that roller and a little thing like that. I fill it at home if I want to touch it up, which I've only done a couple times, but I just drive down to the boat because it's wrapped in, you know, plastic, take it out. You know, as long as it's clean, you don't have to sand or anything like that. And I just roll it on, fix the little dings here and there, and that's done.
It's totally, it's smooth. Remarkable.
No. Oh, you mean the sealer that I used? Yeah, yeah, I just used that because I felt like it was gonna be difficult to clean in the galley with oil and this, that, and the other. So
this
it just went on top.
This is for your stir fries and your,
We cook good. So, yeah, it's not perfect in every scenario, but for me, I think, you know, it's been on 4 years and I'm still enjoying it.
and what I've used is the Pettit Cabin Coat, which is just a latex satin sheen marine interior paint. And it's got some kind of poison in it. It's supposed to keep the mildew from growing. But it goes on, it sticks to stuff pretty easily. You don't have to do a lot of sanding. You don't have, you know, you can just paint your mouse fur, whatever you want to do, you know, it sticks pretty much everything. So that is a low stress way of making your cabin white. It is,
Hey Vince, there's an additive. There's an additive called Aegeon. And that on your interior paint will prevent the mold as well. So it's
okay,
an antimicrobial, anti-mold thing.
and you can put it into any kind of latex paint.
Any kind of paint. As
Any
long as
kind
yeah, you want it on your top coat, obviously.
Right. And there's, can you spell that, Dan?
No,
Agion.
let me look it up.
Agion.
Have you had trouble with mold?
I have had some. Well, something I consider. Anyways, yeah,
I haven't had trouble, but you know, it doesn't.
yeah. Anyways, any comments, questions? I think we're, you know, it's coming up on 9 o'clock, bedtime for most of us.
There's nothing in chat.
Okay. Yes, Andrew mentioned, I think he has an F-22 and I have an F-31, so. Yeah. So thank you all. Has anybody got questions or comments from the Zoomers? No, looks like we're all good.
Thank you. Did the East Coast people fall asleep?
Oh, those East Coast guys, they're gone, man.
Okay.
I do have one comment here, Greg Jacobs.
Go ahead, Jay.
If there are bits of the Oracle clothing left over, I will bring them to Longship Marine in Paulsbo, the marine consignment store. And if they sell there, then any of the proceeds will go to youth sailing in Kitsap County.
Oh, great.
So you might tell Eric that, and if he gets back to me, I'll take care of it.
Okay, great. Thank you, Greg.
Thanks.
All right, Tom. That's it.
I did post that in the chat. It's
Oh, yes.
AGION.
AGION is an antimicrobial mold preventing additive for any kind of paint. And probably, yeah, thank you very much, Dan.
And it works great. It's my interior has been mold free for 6 years. So
Wow. Huh. How's your liver feeling?
I was gonna say, My dehumidifier has.
Well, I'm not licking the interior like Andrew with his air fryer.
All right. Thank you, Dan. Thank you all. And good night.
All right. Thanks, guys. You guys at home, feel free to converse between yourselves. We're gonna end the, we're gonna end the Zoom because it's too noisy to have multiple conversations.